Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, in 1940, Dr. Ray Corsini was a psychologist at Auburn State Prison in upstate New York. And one day, Dr. Corsini had a knock on his door, and in came an inmate who said, you know, I wanted to stop by. I'm about to be released. I wanted to stop by and thank you so much for all you've done for me. After I've seen you, I stopped hanging out with the hardcore convicts. I got a degree in drafting, finished my high school diploma, started going back to church, reunited to my family, and it's all because of you. Now, Corsini couldn't even remember having seen the man. So he checked the file, and what he found was that he had given the man, he administered an IQ test to the man 2 years prior. So Corsini says, I think you have me mixed up with somebody else. The convict said, no, it was you all right, and I'll never forget the words you spoke to me that changed my life forever. Corsini said, what did I say? He said, you told me that I had a high IQ. Now, if you can understand how those 5 words, you have a high IQ, changes someone's life, you too can be a leader. You see, Ray Corsini, that map, those 5 words became a revelation. The clouds parted. And suddenly this gentleman got to see himself for what he really was as opposed to what he believed he was. If you understand that concept, that changing people's lives is what leadership is all about, you too can be a leader, even if it's inadvertent. I had that experience. I changed 17 people's lives in a moment, and I didn't even have to utter a word. It was inadvertent, but I changed their lives. You see, for 10 years, I was a park ranger at a place not very far from here. It's a lake about 200 miles south called Lake San Antonio and Lake Nacimiento. If you've ever been there, please raise your hand. Yes, you have. If I met you while I was there, I was just doing my job. It was nothing personal. See, I thought I was going to be out there telling people, well, there's a deer, over here is where you're going to put your motor home, and this is the lake to launch your boat in. Unfortunately, I didn't get that type of opportunity. Instead, I rode on an average of about 75 tickets a week, arrested many people for everything from drunk driving right on down to domestic violence and so forth. And I was my department's defensive tactics instructor, meaning that I taught martial arts to police officers. And so whenever there was an altercation in the park, I felt like I needed to be there first. You know, I was in my 20s, and boy, we had all this great equipment. In fact, they gave me this gigantic truck to drive. It was the K5 Blazer, the dinosaur SUV, 4-wheel drive, a gigantic light bar on the top of it. Folks, this truck was so big that the wheel well came up to my waist. My partner would often get a nosebleed. We were so high up in the air. So one day, as I'm tooling around the park in my giant truck, a call comes over the radio that there's a fight in progress at the McCandless Spring campgrounds. So I just hot-foot it, put that pedal right to the metal. I zoom down to the campground. I pull around, and right there in front of the restroom, there's 8 guys over here, about 9 guys over there, and no one's throwing a blow. So I thought to myself, if I can get out of this car and get over there before someone punches someone, I can stop this thing right away. I reached behind the seat. I grabbed my nightstick. I slung it in the ring. I opened up the door, and I leapt out of the vehicle. There was only one fatal flaw in my plan. I never took off my seatbelt. So now I'm hanging there in midair. The seatbelt sucks me back in the truck, and the door slams shut. I look out, and I'm thinking, I'm just going to put this in reverse and leave. But everybody was laughing. And folks, they were not laughing with me. So now I get out of the seatbelt and I go storming over there, and I come up to the first gentleman and I say, what's the problem here? He says, no problem at all, officer. We're all going back to our campgrounds. So now this sea of people is departing, and I'm standing out there like this, red-faced as Christmas, but standing out there just like that. All of a sudden, California Highway Patrol pulls up. Monterey County Sheriff's pull up. My boss pulls up. They see this sea of people departing and me standing there, Lone Ranger. My boss walks over and says, John, what did you say to those people? I said, trade secret. I got in my truck. I drove away. I didn't tell that story for 10 years. You see, you change people's lives by who you are and what you do, even if it's inadvertent. And that's what I teach to leaders. See, people call themselves managers. People call themselves supervisors. But the truth of the matter is that you manage time, you manage money, you manage the resources of your company, but you lead people. You lead people. And if you think it's any other way, you're making a mistake. You see, I've had many good teachers. I've had many good leaders. And I am a better person standing here in front of you today because those people were willing to to attempt to help me to change, to help me to grow. So if you are a leader and you've made the determination in your mind that really what this is about is raising people up, helping them to reach and achieve their full potential in life, then the only question you have left, if you've made that decision that changing people's lives is part of what a leader does, then there's only one question to ask yourself. And that question is, how? Now, I have three ideas, three concepts that I'd like to share with you today. And I believe that these three concepts are the cornerstone of all true leadership, of all powerful leadership. You'll see them in all effective leaders, and you'll see them in people who are striving to be effective leaders. And interestingly enough, they all start with C. And they all come with an individual from history that's attached to them. The first concept is best represented by a man who is so popular that you carry a picture around of him in your pocket or in your purse. His name was George Washington. And we've heard that cherry tree story probably once or twice. And I think George probably told a lie every now and again. He was quite a gambler. He liked to play cards. And we all know that maybe you can't be 100% honest when you're playing cards. But George, we didn't need to come up with stories about cherry trees and whatnot because George was a real action hero. Do you know that George had not one horse but two horses shot out from underneath him? And at one point, two flanks of the Revolutionary Army came up on each other and they opened fire on each other. George Washington rode his horse down the center of those volleys, knocking with his sword, knocking guns up and telling people to stop firing. 13 men were killed in that exchange. You see, George Washington possessed that first C. That first C is character. George, his integrity was so amazing, his sincerity was so vast that people followed George into battle. My belief system says that most of the men in the Revolutionary War didn't understand what democracy was, but they did understand that they were A, fighting for their freedom, and B, they were fighting with George Washington. Leaders today need to create a culture of trust, one in which the employees know that you are watching out for them and they're watching out for you. That everybody is in this together, and that is a culture of trust. George also was persistent. There are many historians that believe that George didn't win the Revolutionary War, he just never lost it. And it was his persistence that got him through. So number one, you must have character. Building character is extremely important for leaders today. The second C in our little lineup is best represented by a man who has faded from memory in today, and yet at one time was so renowned that a 9-year-old girl in South America sent him a birthday card addressed only to the greatest man in the world, and it got to him for his 87th birthday. His name was Winston Churchill. And Churchill was truly a large character, 5'6", 200 pounds. And Winston was also, you may have heard it, he was the prime minister in England during that thing that happened. It made all the papers. It was called World War II. That's right, World War II. And Winston was not only the prime minister of England, Winston was also a Nobel Prize winner in literature. For you see, Winston used communication, our next C. Winston used communication to support his entire family. His speeches and his writing was the way that he supported his entire family. He also wrote history books. That's how he won the Nobel Prize. Winston learned early on to use words as weapons, as tools. One time there was a member of parliament who was his nemesis. She cornered him at a social event. And she said, "Winston, if I was your wife, I'd put poison in your coffee." Winston looked at her and said, "Madam, if I was your husband, I'd drink it." In 1940, England was the only country fighting the Nazi menace. 2,000 to 3,000 British subjects a month were dying from the Nazi bombs that were plaguing London. That's when Winston unleashed his most powerful weapon, the English language. He hurled it at the Germans. And in a series of speeches that were broadcast worldwide, he shored up the British subjects. He told the Germans in no uncertain terms, "We will never surrender." And he softened America's heart. You see, at that time, 4 out of 5 Americans wanted nothing to do with another European war. He softened our hearts, and so when our chance came to jump into that war, we did it. Winston's communication was extraordinary and powerful. So powerful that on September 11th, I was at my house in San Luis Obispo, California. I had probably had enough of watching CNN and those planes flying into the World Trade Center, because every time I'd close my eyes, that's all I could see. I took myself out to my study and I went on the internet, I went to the Churchill Library, and I listened to those speeches. And although it's been 50 years since Winston gave those amazing talks, those talks had the same effect on me. I walked out of that room stronger, more sure that we were going to win, we were not only going to survive, we would thrive when this conflict was over. Winston's words travel through the century. Leaders need to be able to communicate with their people. They need to be able to transmit a vision. They need to help people when the going gets tough. And the last the last C of our 3 C's of essentials for leadership is best represented by probably America's most beloved president, John F. Kennedy. You see, right from the beginning, John F. Kennedy challenged us. That's our 3rd C. He challenged us to step up. In his inaugural speech, Kennedy told us, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but rather what you can do for your country." And it didn't stop there. You know, in October 1954, America got a wake-up call. That wake-up call came in the form of a satellite called Sputnik. Funny name, scientific achievement. Stunned the world. Everyone thought America would be first in space, but it was the Russians. And as we stood there with egg on our face, the Russians started showing off. They sent Lutnik up. Lutnik went to the far side of the moon and for 45 minutes sent back grainy black and white photos of a side of that satellite no human being had ever seen before. It was an amazing scientific achievement. Then they sent a dog into space. They sent a man into space. They sent a woman into space. America was still flat-footed on the launch pad. And that's when John Kennedy gave probably one of the greatest speeches in recorded history at Rice University. He told the American people, he challenged the American people. He told us, we're going to the moon, and we're going to do it in the next 10 years. And he told us that it's not because it's easy. We're taking this challenge on because it's tough. And that is going to bring out the very best in us. Kennedy challenged us, and we all know the answer to that challenge. August of 1969, Neil Armstrong took that giant leap for all of us. Character, communication, and challenge. You know, Kennedy didn't just challenge us to achieve things. There was this little thing called the Cuban Missile Crisis. And at that particular time, Kennedy challenged the Russians, full on. They blinked and backed down. John Kennedy understood that leaders need to be able to delegate, that leaders need to be able to confront when someone isn't performing, to confront and to do so with their strength of their power and personality. You see, when you look out over the years and you read the biography of George Washington, you can feel the power of his personality transcend the centuries. When you listen to the speeches of Winston Churchill, it unites people, it motivates people. The word motivation, by the way, comes from a Latin term which means to move. And Winston's words moved people. Today's leaders need to find those words that can move people. And of course, John Kennedy knew how to delegate, knew how to challenge, and knew how to confront with personal power and strength. You see, I firmly believe that our leaders today need to embrace and build character. They need to improve their communication skills. And last but not least, they have to make the choice, because it's a choice, to challenge the people that work for them, because it's the only way that people are truly motivated. When leaders do this, we build a stronger nation and we create a better world. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed being here.